Well, good morning, everybody. We've covered a lot about these last few systems in terms of their snow impact, the incredibly strong winds, the severe weather outbreaks, the flooding threat that's stretched across a broad section here of the United States, the snows in the west, and we've got another one on tap today that could be breaking pressure records yet again in parts of the Midwest. But I just think about all of this in the context of where we might be by the time we get into spring. And given that the focus of these forecasts is on agriculture, I just want to point out that the Mississippi River is about to finally get back above low stage. So it is only 2/3 of a foot below low stage, and given the rainfall that has happened, which is just, it's a lot over the last 7 days, this is getting through the soil and it's getting toward the river system. So it takes time, but I imagine that as we just continue to press forward, given the conditions that are going on right now, as you're probably watching this on Friday, we're expecting to just get more. And the good news about all of that is that this is working against some very long-standing drought issues. Now, we got a new drought monitor yesterday, and just to make a point here about a few things, the drought monitor is slowly changing, but don't forget the data that go into the drought monitor are through Tuesday. It's released to the public on Thursday, so that's why you see the date valid is the 9th and the date released is the 11th. But the important thing is that we've seen the drought change. So if you ever come to this website, there's all sorts of things you should explore across the top. But if you go to maps, you can go to change maps. And what we can look at here is the change over a week or a month. In fact, let's go from a week where we've seen all of this shade showing a 1-class improvement. But let's go back up to the top here and say, show me the last 4 weeks. And what's important about this is while there had been drier conditions in through here, which we've now seen kind of be erased recently, there's been a lot of drought improvement in several areas that really needed to see it. Now the question is, how does it continue to shape up as we press through the rest of this winter, given that there is still an El Nino, although it's fading? And what does it mean once we get into spring? I'm still anticipating very tight spring planting windows for a lot of people. Honestly, if you're east of the Rocky Mountains at this point, I think spring is going to be very active. So I have a lot of concern about that. That's not influenced by what's happening now. I'm not saying that because of these massive systems that are rolling across the country that's what I'm just carrying forward. It's just that typically as El Ninos fade, we tend to have active springs. Now yesterday as the sun was setting here, I want you to note this is the system that has already taken off. It's producing blizzard conditions early this morning in parts of the western Corn Belt. I just wanted you to see a couple of things. You can kind of see the snow underneath the clouds. And what's interesting about the snow under the clouds is we're going to almost follow the same snow line from the previous system and just add more into parts of northern Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan out of this current system. Now, don't forget, it's already forecast just to blast Iowa yet again with heavy snows here and blizzard conditions. But I wanted to note a couple of things. You can see some snow-free ground up here. We'll talk about the Great Lakes in a minute, but usually when you get a little clearer view of this, you'd see that this was covered in ice. But right now our Great Lakes are largely ice-free, mostly due to how mild December was. But then the last thing I want to point out is the winds on the backside of this are very strong. And you can see the dust that was kicked up out of Mexico and New Mexico and then into Texas last night as this low began to take shape. We have widespread wind issues all across the country. We have a big system rolling through today that's going to possibly challenge pressure records in this area and continue to move off to eastern Canada. The nose of the cold air follows this. Another system follows this. It's going to get much farther to the south, so this pattern's not slowing down. I think it's pretty impressive just to watch this on infrared. So what you're looking at here is what we call brightness temperature. It's how much radiance a satellite is measuring, and this is from our GOES satellite. And just the brighter the temperatures, the deeper into the atmosphere the flow is going. That's kind of the way to think about it. So where we see the dull grays is where we're seeing through clear to the ground, the warmest. Wherever you're seeing these bright colors, that's where we're seeing the tops of these very tall clouds. And last night they did produce a lot of lightning and severe weather. And in fact, I live right out here just outside of Champaign, and we heard thunder last night. It was kind of amazing. This morning, this is where our active lightning strikes currently are, coming out of Texas and Louisiana into Arkansas, Mississippi, and then parts of western Tennessee and Kentucky, and also into this part of Missouri. So very active thunderstorms down there. And if we look at the storm reports, because this just switched over early this morning, we had 28 reports of severe weather, most of this wind and hail last night, centered right around Arkansas, which means the Storm Prediction Center's bullseye for there yesterday was a good call. Now, the Storm Prediction Center puts out something called a mesoscale convective discussion. If you ever get to their website and you're just poking around, Just go to spc.noaa.gov, and when you arrive here, you have all these great tabs to go across the top, and they've got these great summary maps. I was interested to read these two mesoscale discussions today. So one to the south is with respect to tornadoes. The one to the north, I just clicked on it a moment ago, is respect to snow rates. And as we talked about coming out of eastern Iowa, which was just hammered with snow, into northern Illinois, approaching Chicago, they're expecting this morning, and also southern Wisconsin, they're expecting through the morning to have snowfall rates of 1 inch per hour or greater. Now, about the only place in the country that sees more than that, where 1 inch an hour is not a big deal, would be our western mountains and then the downwind side of the Great Lakes. And we'll certainly talk about those Great Lakes in a few moments, plus the western mountain snowfall. So what I'm using here to make this graphic, and it's on agweather.com, this is a radar image that's color-coded for both precipitation type and intensity. It comes from the MRMS data set. And what it attempts to do is kind of tell us where it's already snowing this morning. So I've seen some videos of the blizzard conditions on the backside of this. Heavy snows rolling through parts of Iowa and northern Illinois, and then there's this tight rain snow boundary right in through here. And where I've been, it's been rain and thunderstorms all night. Same thing for southern Illinois. And then you can see down into Arkansas, Louisiana. Look at the storms that are just rolling right now, fed on abundant amount of Gulf moisture at this point. Now, as this opens up, there's actually going to be two separate lows that form out of this. They're going to come together over northern Indiana, but right now, the mid-level vorticity has put a kind of a northern low here and a southern low right here, both of them in Illinois, but they expect to kind of orbit around one another and come together later today or right in this area. So this is, to be honest with you, kind of just the beginning of where this one's going to end up going. So our all hazards weather map at 5:35 this morning. Once again, we have every state with some sort of watch or advisory or warning. Broad brush strokes, this is all wind chill related. This is all winter storm related, including a huge area of blizzard warning here, and then in pockets around the Great Lakes. You then see all of this showing up as wind, flood threat here, and down south, this is where we have our tornado watch. Now in the west, the system's coming in targeting right in through this area, which is why we have such a large area of winter storm warnings out, including part of the Sierra Nevada. And there's cold air coming in here in the plains, but there's also very cold air that's still tucked away in California's Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, and down here into southern parts of Arizona. So, these maps are designed to kind of keep us informed, but when there's so many different threats, a lot of this gets overlaid. So you don't see that some places have not only wind chill, but wind warnings, blizzard, they got several different warnings. And it's all because by the late today, this is what the system's going to look like in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. So as both of those lows kind of come together somewhere over northern Illinois, northern Indiana, we expect the pressure to potentially drop down to maybe below 980 millibars. And it'll be followed on the back side, coming right out of this area here, with high pressure that could top 1,040 to 1,050 millibars. And just to put that into context, for North America, we would often think of those being the two kind of upper and lower bounds on the depth of lows and the reaches of a high pressure cell. Now, that doesn't mean we can't go over or below that, like a hurricane certainly can, and big Siberian highs that sneak over into Canada can get way above that. Think up to 1,060, a 1060 high. But it's just important to note what's rolling across the country today and the wind field that will be around this. Now, speaking of the wind field, we will be drawing in incredibly cold air, and what we'll end up getting out of this are wind chill temperatures that are going to be absolutely, just raw, brutally cold wind chill temperatures for several days in a row, and it's going to arc right along this kind of area that I'm drawing in through here. But what you notice is that the warm sector of the storm system is drawing quite a bit of very warm and unstable air into this region, and that whole setup is giving us today's day one convective outlook, stretching from Mississippi initially, and then as the system progresses forward into the overnight hours, it'll spread where we were worried about earlier in the week, which will be back over here into the southeast, where we saw the previous system put down, or almost up to 500 reports of severe weather from that previous system. So it's the upper level wind support that's making this all possible. You have a jet streak rounding the base of a negatively tilted trough. So there's your negative tilt, there's your jet streak, and this it's actually more than that. You get the curvature effect, you get the downwind strong jet streak effect, and what this does is this just, in terms of fluid dynamics, this is producing an area of divergence. So air is evacuating this area. And it's happening strongest at the jet stream level. So we're pulling air out aloft. So the atmosphere at the surface just tries to fill it in. So it's always trying to achieve equilibrium. So it's trying to just put all that air back in. And what happens is you put all that air back in and it all just comes into one spot. Well, where's its only place to go? And that's up. So it rises here. And as it rises, that's where you get your cooling, your condensation, and your cloud cover. On the backside where we have this high pressure cell, you have the exact opposite. We have air filling in the backside of the low, this whole stretch in through here. And as it gets filled in, the pressure begins to build. So really, when you see an L on a map, a low pressure center, it's actually the pivot point. It's being filled in from the backside and it's dropping on the front side, and it just gets carried along toward the places where the pressures are falling and away from the place where the pressure is rising. And it's a beautiful system just to study, but this is our first low, and it's going to have plenty of support to deepen throughout the day today. And then as it rolls into, Ontario and Quebec, it's actually going to get stuck and just sit and spin over the Hudson Bay. Now behind it, we're going to see some really, really cold air Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, just getting kind of shoved into this deeper trough. And it's going to be on the southern side of this where we're going to watch for the next chance at getting our next precipitation event over the weekend into early next week. Now, what's interesting about this is the way this trough is oriented and the high pressure that will be funneling in behind it. What you're going to end up getting is some support from the backside of this jet streak combined with the surface cold air and a little bit of overrunning to help develop some, again, low pressure and the chance for precipitation, but not a big winter cyclone out of this. Going past Tuesday into next Wednesday and Thursday, we have to keep an eye on this trough. It has a different look. Do you see how the fastest winds are here and not right there? If they came through the base, we'd be saying, next winter storm will be here by next Thursday. Not the right setup for this. But that low is going to roll through, and where it may deepen most by next Friday is going to be here into New England. And after that, the discussion will go back to jet extension issues. Very typical El Nino. It's coming back. Jet extension, what does it do? Flow comes in. This is a big deal for the west, but it comes over the top, convergent flow, drier conditions start to return. We get a break, and that's all the way out there around the 21st. So let's kind of put this all together. I was a little ahead of you here in the high-res NAM, so let's just start this off this morning. And as we play it forward, you got two systems to watch, one here and the one coming in the northwest. So the storms to the south, the very difficult to predict rain to snow line right in through here. This is just the high-res NAM's projection of it at 1 o'clock, getting into 2 and 3. How quickly this area flips back over to snow will be critical to the snowfall totals, but look at the spacing of the isobars back in Iowa. They're so tight, and the pressure's going to be rising so quickly, you're going to get a wind on the back side of this that's going to be 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. Now, while that's occurring, there could be thunderstorm winds to the south here that could be easily that fast or faster. So the low curls up Friday afternoon and evening, spreading heavy snows into southern Wisconsin, right over the parts of northern Illinois, northern Indiana, and Michigan. And we start off getting some snow here in parts of western New York and northern Pennsylvania, but that could convert to rain once the low opens and delivers a bit more warmer air. Now on the backside, broad area of heavy snowfall expected here, and it's going to be extremely windy. And we're going to watch visibilities reduce, and if you don't have anywhere to go, don't go anywhere if you're in this low pressure system tonight here. So how quickly did that front make it through the southeast? Well, here's Friday at 11 a.m. This is Friday at 8 p.m. and getting into the overnight hours. By 4 a.m. in the morning, that front's cleared. So we're really just watching the next, let's call it, 24 hours right in through here for the risk of the severe weather, starting first here and moving to the Carolinas overnight tonight. Now, as that system leaves, behind it, we're expecting to see a lot of lake effect snow. We'll come back to that in just a few minutes, but you can see the NAM just tossing out these long bands of lake effect snow, and it'll be wind parallel across, let me rephrase that, it'll be shore parallel across Erie and Ontario and wind parallel across the other lakes. So we'll see some heavy snow out of this. Okay, watch back here. Take it back here. Later today, the flow begins to start. We're going to run the risk of ice south of Portland right in through this area here. And then you're going to see kind of the nose of that high pressure keeping the coldest air in place. So there's our ice threat in the overnight hours, or today and then into tonight. Continues into tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon on Saturday. Heavy snows coming in. I'll show you the snowfall totals in a moment. Just look at the size of that system. And that one's going to also be a part of what we'll be watching late this weekend, early next week, for the snow threat right in through this corridor. Now, I was looking this morning at the forecast soundings just south of Portland, so right there in the Willamette Valley. And this is a classic freezing rain sounding. You can see here's the 0-degree isotherm, kind of rolling over here, which means this part of the vertical temperature change is above freezing, and this is sub-freezing. So any precipitation made in this will start off possibly as snow or start off as rain here, and then it'll fall into this deep surface sub-freezing layer, meaning that it will likely hit the ground and freeze on contact. So this is our risk of ice in that area. And the other part of this I mentioned, since we're talking about ice, is the Great Lakes. This is some of the lowest concentration for this time of year, kind of historically. It's only 1.45% ice covered as of January 11th. You can kind of see where some of that ice is located, and that's what's going to really set us up for big lake effect snow. The lakes are still very warm, and there's some ice cold air coming over the top of it. So I tell you what, let's start off on the freezing rain side of this, 72-hour probability maps. Now, this is going to be coming in at the end of the weekend, in and around somewhere between Dallas and Houston, the risk of ice. But what I'm thinking a lot about is, sorry, this is such a sensitive website. There we go. Thinking a lot about the risk of getting that ice to accumulate. Again, Portland, Salem, Eugene, this whole region into here in the Willamette Valley, potential for picking up ice is relatively high. Now, if we zoom back out and just kind of get a good view of the whole U.S. here, I'm going to flip this over to snow. And the snow probabilities start off at 2 inches, which you can see just such a broad section of the country being impacted. But here's where we have the best chance at 4 inches. And again, we're starting to pick up on that. Really, this is the fifth system of all of the ones we've been tracking. But in the current forecast, we call it the second. And there's the probability of 8. So now we see that upper Midwest Great Lake risk plus the snow coming in here and how deep it could get. How about the probability of over a foot? So now we can really start to identify that. And of course, we'll be talking about that lake effect snow coming behind this. And there's the probability of 18 inches. Okay, how about some wrap up here on our Ensemble low pressure placement? So you remember me earlier saying, well, we got kind of 2 lows. There's one here and one here. There's 2 different areas that by midday today start to coalesce right over parts of northern Illinois and Indiana. And there is the possibility that this drops down below 980 millibars, which again would be another record setter, goes right through southern Michigan and then exits, you can see here, into Ontario and Quebec. Now, behind it is where the deepest high pressure starts to build in. There's a chance that this could get not to 1040, but maybe 1045 or 1050. And with it, some very cold air, meaning this next system, the one that came through the west we showed a moment ago, sneaks out underneath this cold air coming in at the surface, warmer air aloft. It's just going to roll right through this part of the Mid-South toward the Mid-Atlantic. So that story hasn't changed too much. If we look at it on the high-res models that are global, that's the European and the GFS, we just see all this coming together. So here's through Friday, getting into Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and evening. We've already seen this in the NAM, getting in now into Sunday morning, Sunday midday, and Sunday evening. Now watch. By the time we get into early Monday morning, this is where the threat of ice begins to show up here and the threat of snow begins to show up north of this. You can see it already a little bit better in the GFS, but there's that ice threat I'm concerned about. Now this is early Monday morning. There it is, 6 a.m., playing through noon, getting into 6 p.m., and getting out there to early Tuesday morning. So I went kind of fast there, but you'll see it again. So this is Sunday night through Tuesday morning. We're going to watch for some snow on the northern side of this, ice threat coming out of Texas into Louisiana, maybe into parts of Mississippi. And as we play it forward, the models handle it entirely differently going into midweek next week. You see the GFS deepens a low and rolls it up the East Coast. Look at the snow it's got in it. Nowhere to be found in the European. Already after 126 hours, these models have 2 entirely different views of the weather. There's not good agreement. Notice the Pacific Northwest getting hit again. In the European, nothing here. So we are going to have to watch this all weekend. You can go look at all of the stuff at agweather.com just so you can keep an eye on it. But I mean, right now, if I lived up the East Coast and I saw the GFS forecast, I'd be like, holy smokes. And the European's nada, nothing. Same thing for the Northwest. I mean, the model agreement is terrible at this point going forward. Now, we could spend a lot of time explaining why. I think it's an initialization problem. But even into early next week, where they just fall apart. So I'm going to stick with the ensembles on this, okay? And so let's go ahead and have a look at a few things to get to those ensembles. Let's get here. European model, how much snow is it expecting to kind of produce? I'll just take you out there and show it all to you, all the way out there to, let's go out 7 days. So it's backed off on the snowfall amount south, 1 to 3 inches down here. It has kept most of the snow farther to the north, but really hammering Lake Michigan and surrounding areas. Cascades grabbing in Oregon here, another possibly 40 inches of snow. So you can see the European model solution. How about the GFS? That's out a week. So there could be 30 inches of snow on the ground in Iowa, not 30 additional, but 30 in total from the last two systems. It's got better snows that roll through this area. Heavy snows in New England, which the European didn't. About the only place it agrees on is the Cascades. So very, very, big changes between the models. That's the European. There's the GFS, just on snowfall alone. Now, on the ice threat, I'm going to rely on the European to pick this up. I think it's had a better handle on it. So through next Wednesday, we have this weekend. We'll watch this early next week. Please be aware in these areas of the risk of some ice. So I told you we needed to get to the ensembles, and this is where I think we should live when it comes to predicting snow. The blizzard warning is warranted right here. I mean, we have another, not just 3 inches of snow, but step it up to 6. Get it up to 12 here. And of course, the mountains, heavy, heavy snows out west. But I want to take you back and just show you again, the chance of getting 3 inches in this area from that next system early next week, it's pretty low. But there's going to be some snow that falls in this area. The question is, should we not be using a 10-to-1 ratio again? Should we use a higher ratio? Because it's going to be cold on the northern side of this. Maybe it should be 15-to-1. That's probably more representative given how cold it's going to be. But long story short, you start to put all this together, and there's a lot of snow getting added to this map. So things are certainly going to change. Now, before I show you more on snow, let's talk about the precipitation side of it. Whoops. Let's go to precipitation probabilities. Who's got the best chance of getting an inch? An inch of liquid out of this over the next 10 days. How about 2 inches of liquid out of this? Heaviest here, down in Florida in the northwest. Now, coming back to snow, this was through yesterday, but this is our season-to-date percent of normal snowfall. And where we're adding more is right where it's already been, right in through this corridor. And this whole area is going to start to make a huge jump up. Down one of the Great Lakes is going to make a jump up. Parts of the Pacific Northwest are. But overall, I look at this and I see still a lot of places in the west that need a lot more snow. So does the upper Midwest and northern plains. They need more snow cover. So we take a look at the west. I do want to show you what has changed. On January 1st, this was the percent of average snow water equivalent. And if we jump this now back to the, let's see here, we can probably go to the 11th. Yeah, big improvements out here and more to come. That's good. All right, from there, MJO movement. If it keeps sweeping around like this, the big thing that we'll get, we saw this happen in December, is a jet extension. Starting in, the Mediterranean or the Sahara, going all the way across India, China, leaving Japan, and finishing here, all the way over in Southern California and Mexico. Now, you know what I'm about to draw, because if we ever get a jet extension like this, the split happens over the mountains. So we get flow that comes out of the northwest through the Canadian Prairie, northern plains into the mid-south. That's dry. California, southern tier of the United States, southeast stays wet with this pattern. Now, before I show you that week 2, I want to take you to the end of week 2, because it appears the last week of January, when the jet retracts again, that the split happens here. And what does that mean? Southwest flow returns, end of the month will be active again. So we're kind of in this really active time period now. It's going to all slow down and then go right back to it at the end of the month. So the week 2 forecasts continue to get wetter and wetter. So we had this larger area that was concerned about being dry. Well, now we start to see the change. So wetter west, wetter south, it's opening back up, new systems rolling through. So that's what we've got. We're going to end this really active time period by early next week with cold, cold air. Jet extension happens. That takes the west into major play for a while. The rest of the country gets a little break, and then it kicks back up as we approach that third week, the end of the third week of January, the beginning of the fourth. All right, temperatures now. This is what the forecast wind chills could be on Sunday morning as the sun rises. So you can see the numbers, and if you're in the central United States, you've got an idea of how cold this is going to be. Minus 30 to minus 40, maybe in some places up to minus 50 degrees on the wind chills. What the actual low temperatures look like, so this does not include wind chill. This is this morning. This will be Saturday morning's lows, getting into Sunday morning, Monday morning, Tuesday, and Wednesday as that cold air just continues to penetrate farther and farther to the south and east. Now, I apologize. The newest data from the National Digital Forecast Database did not populate for California and Nevada. They'll probably fix it later this morning. But this is where the mild air is going to start to invade first. So if you look, your next 5 days look something like this. We average more than 20 degrees below normal through this area. Day 5 through 10, that then gets right here into parts of the Mid-South, Ohio Valley, Mississippi Valley. But notice the mild conditions starting to come back into the west. And once we get out there into day 10 through 15, we start to see the whole system go back into reset. Notice where the cold air goes. Alaska, Canada, and back up into Greenland. This is what's going to allow for more mild air to come back into this area. But we don't expect it to last long. Now, on the extended forecast side of this, I'm going to just make a point here that I think the GFS extended is actually doing better than the European extended. The European extended just wants to default to El Nino. But here's that drier week I mentioned, and then notice as we get out here toward the end of the month, we tend to get more active again right here in the central part of the United States. I think it's too dry for the west. The model's too dry for the west, but it does continue to show, starting into February, flow. I mean, this is not picking up on strong dry signals, so I think we're going to continue to see a pretty active winter on and off as we go forward. Okay, from there, MJO. We talked about this a lot this week. Just stripe it out. There we go. So this is the drier conditions moving into Brazil now, but wetter conditions are expected to turn into Brazil once we get into the end of the month. This is the MJO moving through this area towards 781. When it gets back to 781, we go back over cold and active in the midsection of the country. But I think the MJO is moving over the top of El Nino, and I don't think El Nino has much left in it. I mean, look at this blues. This represents easterly component to the wind. And if you want El Nino, this all has to be red. I told you about it yesterday, and we just don't have it. So is this El Nino at its peak and starting to fade? Yes. How fast? Now, my tone a moment ago makes it sound as though it's fading like I'm just dropping a rock in the ocean. It's going to go to the bottom. It's not. I think that the models are way too aggressive coming out of North America. Those that go into the CPC forecast, they're too aggressive at developing La Nina by spring and summer. And I've got a lot of reason for that. The CPC has overshot several of the last transitions. Every model has. They keep overshooting the transitions, either to El Nino or to La Nina. And the other thing I'm just concerned about is this. Let's get this to refresh here so you can watch the animation. This is the top of the Pacific Ocean from South America to Indonesia. And this is our El Nino up here, the warm water surfacing. What I don't see is a really, really cold, I mean, it looks cold, but it's not. Just a couple of degrees cooler than average. I don't see this rapidly returning its way back to the first of all, the surface or, this side of the ocean. That's what you'd have to see to be really worried about a fast transition. So we have to be careful with it. I don't think that we've got a strong handle on the speed at which this is going to change. And over the weekend, we'll get some even more longer range information. So I'll look forward to giving you that next week. But as it stands over the next 10 days, we're cold in Northern Europe, cold across parts of Russia, cold here. But this is all going to flip-flop. I think we're going to go back over cold in Alaska and Greenland beyond that, and mild air is going to start to return. But this is just a quick picture internationally, and here's the other thing I want to show you. Europe continues to be very active with winter precipitation. This is beating back any sort of spring drought concern across Europe. You see better rains coming into South Africa, better rains into the southern part of Africa. We see very wet conditions over Indonesia, and there's two tropical systems that could be forming, although I think the one to the west will be favored into northern Australia. This has not been a typical El Nino for Australia. Very, very wet overall in the east, very dry in the west. Back into South America with the MJO moving into those phases where it's drier here, we're expecting to go to a drier week while Argentina continues to stay wet. But if you look at the chance over the next 10 days of 2 inches of rain, which would be just a hair below average, this is the area that just went back over drier. This is drier. Paraguay's drier. But this is very wet down here because remember, Argentina has a much different precipitation regime than Brazil does. And if we think about some of the bigger concerns going forward, there's that drier signal, wet in Argentina. Now watch, as we play out there toward the end of the month, the model continues to bring in to finish January and start February, very wet conditions. And why this is so important is this is the heart of harvest here. And if we're really wet, there's going to be delays. And I've now made that in every video this week. This is a consistent trend in the models. It makes sense given the MJO movement. How long does it last? Well, going through February, the models want to keep that wetter signal somewhere around, which means I think we could be talking about some harvest delay. I don't know how much. I don't know. I just don't know. But it's a signal that I'm watching carefully. And I'll finish with one last thing I keep talking about. Any delays is going to push Safrinha later, right? And we are concerned from the European model that we're going to be going over drier here once we get into April. In other words, the monsoon may be slowing down early across Brazil's center, west, and northern growing areas. That was now confirmed in the new NMME forecast for April, May, and June that compared to average, the model went over dry as well. So now there's building support of concern for the Safrinha crop's finishing rains. So I'll leave it at that. I'll keep watching. I'll report back to you again soon. Have a great weekend. Be safe with this winter storm, and we'll talk on Monday. Thanks.